Hello, I'm your host, Marcus Garrett. Every week I have entertaining conversations with your favorite influencers and entrepreneurs. Now, let's get started with this week's show. If you're a returning listener, please leave a quick 5-star review and rep for your city in the review section and or comments. And yes, that includes my people from across the pond. I'm trying to grow over there across the pond. I think I'm at 3%, so I got a little ways to go. Season 3 of the Marcus Garrett Show is focused on the journey from employee to entrepreneur, and this is the drop. Stephen Stack is a debt-free financial coach who focuses on holistic wealth. Stephen believes wealth is not only what's in your bank account, but also the person you're becoming. Money is a great tool, but a terrible master. So it can't be the measure of identity or a meaningful life. I've invited Stephen to walk us through 156 years of history of the racial wealth gap and the path forward. Welcome to the show, Stephen.
Hey, what's up, man? Thanks for having me.
So for the people to know, I recommended you for, I curate podcasts every month at allstarmoney.com. I did a Black History Month, of course, feature for All Star Money. And you were actually the recommendation of the week after I heard your episode 13, the Black Wealth series. So I was like, you know what? I got to have this brother on the show. You dropped what we were talking about before we got started here. You were dropping several nuggets and, you know, I'm on the cusp of 40, read several books, and I still learn new things. I was like, man, I never knew that. So I wanted to bring you over here to my listening audience so they could benefit as well. We're going to transition here to the life after debt segment because living life and living debt free don't have to be mutually exclusive. And my first question, like I said, I gave you a varied audience that you're speaking to. So let's set some borders for today's discussion. How are we going to define wealth in this talk?
So we'll do more of the traditional sense of thinking about material wealth as far as net worth. So I don't want to assume that people know what net worth is. The simple definition would be taking your assets, so things of positive value, that could be investment accounts or savings accounts, things like that. It could be the positive equity in one's home, or let's say if you have a paid off car or the value of that car is more than what's owed on it. All these things can be assets, and then you subtract your liabilities. So assets minus liabilities gives you net worth, and liabilities are just things you owe. So that could be credit card debt, personal loan, student loans. In the more rare occasion, if you have a home that's underwater, meaning that you owe more than what it's worth, it'd be a liability, because if you sold it, you'd still have to cut a check to pay the difference of what's left. So that's the framework of wealth for today's discussion.
And I think that's actually a great starting point, because when I was listening to your previous podcast, and you can find a direct link to if y'all want to kind of do some background research, you can find that link in your show notes below. You talked about two acts that jumped out for me that made a significant difference in the United States. And I may get these acts wrong, but from my notes, and I think it's important to recognize that a lot of these acts were sanctioned by the government. That's what we talk about when we talk about systemic issues. And it was the Homestead Acts of 1862 and 1866, you said, impacting approximately 46 million. I'm going to hit that one more time. 46 million American adults and their direct descendants today. And so can you break down the financial history lesson and some of the impact of those acts?
Yeah. And man, you nailed it. Yes. The Homestead Act of 1862 and the Southern Homestead Act of 1866. Here's what happened is 10% of all of the US's land mass was given to white families and families of European descent. And that $46 million number, I want to really try to unpack it to give deep context into it. So what happened is 10% of the land mass for the US was given to roughly about 1.6 million people, somewhere in there. By the year 2000, so the last act was 1866. By the year 2000, 46 million American adults were direct descendants of beneficiaries of these two acts. Now, first off, 46 million is a ton of people, but to put that in context, because that's just American adults by the year 2000, which is only about 2 decades ago, 46 million is more than the amount of African American people in the US. African Americans make up roughly about 13% of the US population. So for every Black person that you would see in the US, the number, that 46 million people number, is more than the amount of Black people, period. And again, that was as of 20 years ago, roughly. Technically it'd be 22. So the number didn't get smaller, is what I want to make clear. And again, 10% of all land was transferred in these two acts. And you have to understand how that connects to wealth, because this may be breaking news for the listeners. New land isn't being made. So, and that's one of the most fundamental ways to be able to build wealth, is owning property / land, etc.
And I guess, and maybe you just addressed it right there, since I am trying to appeal to that across the pond. For those who need the context, last I checked, my numbers might be a little bit off as well. Through the magic of editing, you might see some update numbers on your screen now. The population was around 330 million, and it may have gone down there since people are having less children. But last time I looked at it, it's about the U.S. population was around 330 million. Identifying as Caucasian, I'm not going to go through identifying and all that breakdown right now, but it was around 70 million the last I checked, just so people have some numbers to work with. So 47 million impacted through this act, and these are descendants that we're talking about here. Total population in the U.S. around 330 million, and then that 13% for African American. I'll probably have a slide up just so I can keep these numbers. I think that was around 18 million, but I'll get a breakdown here as well, just so people, okay, here's the breakdown of the numbers that we're working with. So for that land transfer, and I assume this is where I'm going to come to you for the question, it's the appreciation of land and wealth over time. But how does that land transfer connect to either wealth in the past or to wealth today?
So multi-layered there, but just if we try to do the simplest way to look at it is, yes, just if on a fundamental level of, if you get land and relatively keep most of it or even some of it, it has appreciated dramatically over time. Dramatically. So for me, I'm located in North Carolina. I know people personally, and I mean, even I've experienced this kind of dynamic myself during the pandemic, of seeing personal property appreciate just since 2020 a 6-figure amount on a home that they were just living in. We're talking about 160 years. Think about the impact of that, of just having the stability of having your own space, and then being able to potentially leverage against that property, the asset that you own, to be able to do other things. So this may be, I just want to make sure people can really connect with it. It's not just the amount of wealth itself, but imagine if you can go back in time. So for people who are, adults and maybe did college or whatever kind of education you may have gotten, imagine that you're embarking on a career but you know that your parents got you. So it's not, hey, I'm first generation college student, or I've got to make sure all these things work out on my path to getting a degree, because if it doesn't happen, if I don't get some corporation to bring me in, then I just don't have work. But you have your parents in a stable place where maybe they own their own business, or they have connections that they've built over time in the family by amassing wealth, to where you don't just have to figure it out at a job fair. Maybe your folks know somebody within a different entity. So I'm just trying to give different ways for people to process how this can impact really everything.
And also going to ask a question that you talked about on the previous show. I'll share a brief anecdote from a story that I told on another, and I won't go too deep, but I think some people hear 156 years, that was forever ago. That's so long ago. And I want to put some context to that and break it down into really that's 3 generations. And for example, who has passed now, but my great grandmother, she lived to 110. So she would have fell within that period. It'd been 2 generations in that case. But the story my father told once, when they desegregated the pool in his hometown, and he went as a child, he went back and showed me this pool, and I think they had reopened it. But he showed me the area where it took place. But rather than allow for that desegregation, they filled in the pool with, I think he said sand or cement. But rather than allow for desegregation, they just filled in the pool. That they couldn't wrap their hands around letting black and white children swim together. And I thought about that later. It was around Thanksgiving, and giving a conceptual or a timeline. I thought, we were sitting there, and I'm here with my brother-in-law and mother, father, and everything like that. And I realized that the other side of that, somebody's father who got to swim in that pool is also sitting around, and he probably tells that story like, oh, I remember this great summer, and it was so hot, and for some reason they filled in the pool. Like he'll forever have a different perspective of how that story went, and it happened during that same time frame. You talked about a friend going back to home ownership, and he talked about you were talking about redlining, but he was talking about how it still happens today. And it was a comment that his friend had made to him about letting other people into the neighborhood. Do you recall that story, or a story
Yes.
similar to that you want to share?
Yeah. No, I do. And so what had happened was, I was talking with a friend here where I live, and they had lacked some of the requirements around potential financing and different things like that for the neighborhood that he lived in. And so as a result of that, there were more minorities moving into this neighborhood, which it's a nice neighborhood as far as if you think like affluence and a lot of the amenities and all the things like that. And so it had historically been mostly white people as far as the demographic makeup of this neighborhood. And so when more people of color and minorities started moving in, this friend told me about this, of his neighbor came up to him and said, man, I don't really like the changes that are happening in this neighborhood. They're starting to let the riffraff in. And even maybe a few years earlier, because this friend of mine, he's in like his mid 40s, he probably wouldn't have thought much about it, but because he and I have a relationship and we've talked about things like this, it stung him, because he realized how racially coded what that statement really was. Because there's nothing inherently wrong with these people coming in. They met the requirements, they had the financing to be able to either buy or build in this neighborhood. So what was it that would make them riffraff all of a sudden that they were in? And again, my friend lives in the neighborhood, so it wasn't like there's all kinds of violations, or now people are speeding through the neighborhood, or massive parties and loud music, like any kind of stuff that would hint at, quote unquote, calling them riffraff, other than they had a darker shade, or darker hue of skin. So if you think about this, these homes, they've appreciated dramatically since the pandemic has started. And the reality is that's been pretty consistent in general. It's an area where there's more resources for the schools in this area, which it's kind of this circular thing if we're talking about wealth, because they're able to generate more taxes because the homes are appreciating. And the reason why the homes are appreciating is because more people want to move to the area for the schools, which the schools are getting more funding from the taxes from the homes appreciating. So it's literally like the song that never ends from Lamb Chop. It just goes on and on. My friend, it's circular. Hey, which one is it, the chicken or the egg? But you can see how if you're locked out of these quote unquote good areas and you're in a less desirable area, then you don't get to partake in that equity buildup, that wealth generation of just where you happen to live in town.
And I'm going to pivot a little bit, and we ultimately might come back to it, but we introduced a pretty deep concept there as far as conceptual and more information. Do you have any books? And it's redlining, which we may revisit again because I'm having some questions around home ownership. But is there any books, or so, we got 45 minutes to unpack 156 years. So for the person who says, this is either the first time I'm hearing this, or I'd like more information, do you have any books or resources you'd recommend that they could learn about?
I'd say if I had to recommend just one, which there are multiple books that would give a lot of good context to this, I would say a book called The Color of Money. It's by a lady named Mirza Baradaran. If you just type in The Color of Money and her first name is Mehrsa, it'll pull up. You'll see it. It does a really good job of trying to walk people through all of these different dynamics financially that really helped to establish and widen the racial wealth gap. It's a really good read.
I appreciate it. And the reason I did that, people probably feel like this is the Fresh Prince, how come you don't love me, man episode. Because it's normally really light around here. I got music in the background. I think I sang and danced on the show. So they're like, man, golly, this is a little weighty, ain't it, man? They might be driving into work. So, I want them to have, if they want to continue this in-depth review and get more information, I want them to have that available to them. And I'll drop some resources in addition to what we talked about here in your show notes so you can grab that information. And that's not to say that I'm going to go light, but I was going to pivot. There's actually, and there always is, but literally dropped this week, a story from CNBC that's making the rounds. I got to give CNBC credit for headlines that make the rounds, but this one actually turned out to be a video. It's a Black spending power reaches record 1.6 trillion, but net worth falls. So I'll get that show and probably through the power of editing. If you're on YouTube at youtube.com/TheMarcusGarrett, there'll probably be a video playing right now, the actual video. But I pulled a few points out of there, and I just kind of wanted to get your perspective on these. Either I don't know if you saw the video, if you did, or just really your thoughts on these points.
For our Equity and Opportunity series, and Frank Holland joins us this morning with a closer look at the growth in Black spending power. Frank.
Hey, good morning to you, Andrew. Black spending power reached a record $1.6 trillion in 2021. The ability to buy, save, and invest more than doubling since 2000. That growth exceeding the full U.S. economy, but actually lagging other ethnic groups. Latinos with a 288% increase, Asians with a 388% increase in spending power. However, other groups, they've also seen an increase in their net worth. Black Americans instead have seen their wealth actually fall by 14%. And with the S&P gaining 27% last year, the value of U.S. homes increasing by 31% last year. Many black leaders are asking the black community to really rethink how it spends.
So one of them was, and actually I'm not sure I knew this. I knew the net worth was low. So we talked about it earlier that net worth is assets minus liabilities. But 1 in 5 black Americans have a negative net worth. Either thoughts or context for why that is, or what impact will that have on their ability to build wealth?
Yeah, so I actually did get a chance to look at the video, and it's only because I'm in the space and am a data miner. That's the only reason it wasn't shocking for me. But just because it's not surprising doesn't mean that it's not a stunning thing to see. You see this massive amount of spending power, which the video even talks about. As much as African American spending power has gone up, it still was lagging other groups. But to see the spending power go up over 100%, but then see net worth drop like 14%, I was like, oh my goodness, man. It's but the reality of it is this: between understanding some of the history, some of the cultural norms that have been accepted to come alongside it, of saying, okay, well, I don't have the wealth, so I might as well at least look like I have it. That's a dynamic that's not great. And that's kind of a human dynamic too. So I don't want to make it seem like that's just African American people, because the reality is it's just not. I mean, if people don't have it, a lot of times they're like, hey, well, I at least want to look like I have it, because nobody wants to be the person who's wearing the shoes that no one's ever heard of, or they're wearing clothes that it's clear that, oh man, you must be struggling, because people get made fun of for that and looked down upon for that. So I get it. But then again, you also have these dynamics of, so like one stat that people may not know is that African Americans own 1% of all stocks, but represent 14% of all credit card debt. So if you look at just that as an example stat, what it would tell you is, okay, if you're light on assets and heavier on liabilities, what do you think's going to happen? Because credit card debt is likely, because it's typically high interest debt, double-digit interest rates, it's pounding you in the opposite direction. So compound interest either works for you or against you. When you have a bunch of assets, it works for you. When you have a bunch of liabilities, it is actively and viciously working against you to pull down one's net worth. So I'm just giving some anecdotal examples of how this happens.
Yeah, and recently I actually even just talked about that. So the average APR is about 14%. Average debt, and I don't have it by race, but the average household debt in America is around $7,000. So to talk about how difficult it is to overcome these circumstances, if they just made the minimum payment, anyone, regardless of race, made the minimum payment on those credit cards, it would take them 30.4 years. It was like 366 months or something to that effect. And I just think a lot of people, they get into these circumstances, and that's why I want to provide that generational context. Some people might say, well, why don't you just buy a home? I think Mitt Romney said, if you need money, why don't you just ask your parents? So, you know, like if the solutions were that simple, people would do them. So I think another quote that I heard is, the more complex the problem, the easier solution people want. So unfortunately for something like this, when we're talking about just credit card debt, would take 30 years to get out of if they were making the minimum payment. And then you start piling on student loan debt. And it would not surprise me. In fact, I believe it's factually true that African Americans have more student loan debt and more credit card debt because of the things that they have to overcome just to get into a position to start to save themselves, let alone any other generation or family member that may be dependent on them. So that's why I want people to have this context of it's not going to be a flip of the switch, and it's a marathon. And now I want to let people know, because I feel like I'm just weighing people on the shoulders right now. So I'm going to end with some tips that came from this video and some advice. So we're going to try to end on a higher note than we are. I want people to leave like, God, I was not ready for that episode. But some of the causes that came out in that video, you've literally spoken to this, but if there's anything else you want to talk about, it was I'll just say both because you've spoken to them and they might tie together. The primary causes from the host of this show was educational disparities, housing, and I think he literally said, quote, redlining. Is there anything else that you want to expand on as far as how those are implicating or causing some of this racial wealth gap and this gap in net worth?
Yeah, so redlining, that is just to try to define it for people that may be listening. The simplest way, or to give context on it, is you had banking institutions, lending institutions, who they marked in red. So they'd have maps, and green meant good, red meant bad, and then you had some different colors in between to be, it would vary. But the red areas were considered to be high risk or high credit risk to loan money out to. And these were primarily predicated on the racial makeup of these areas. So what would happen is lending institutions and banks and so on, they would look at the red areas and either not lend money at all or have a higher interest rate for lending money to those areas, which that would impact the people that live there, because folks wouldn't want to live in those areas, which depresses the values of the the property values of the homes there. If you have to pay more money for lesser property, you can see how that can spread over time. So I mean that's a big factor. The home ownership side, people having a better understanding of just owning assets in general, as far as buying things like stocks or equities and bonds and so on, so that you have assets that when the market is up, which generally the trend for the market is up, that you actually realize some gains from that, especially when it comes time, if you're looking to sell, to actually use those funds for living or passing down wealth. So those are some of the main things I'll think about. Education is important. It is, like, you do see correlations between education and wealth, but even with that, and so do you mind if I just talk really real for a second, man, on the education piece?
Go ahead.
So a lot of education from school, you're not really, there's a lot of degrees where you're not even really learning the stuff that you'll need to do the job. Like, a lot of the time you get trained once you get hired. I think some of the biggest things that you take away from school is how to learn relationship building with people around you. And one thing I just want to encourage people on the education side is it's not just education for education's sake. If your degree is in basket weaving, man, it's not going to work out, more than likely. And now that's me being, a little facetious, but like when we'll see people getting degrees, especially advanced degrees in fields that don't really pay, it can be damaging. So I don't want to just say broad strokes education, because if your degree is in, and man, forgive me for whoever has a degree in this, but I'm going to say it. So if your degree is in, let's say, parks, tourism, and recreational management, um, it's limited what your options will be from a career standpoint in that kind of field. Or even for people, which I love, people who do this, like you may have a degree in like sociology, which we need people in these fields. But we also got to understand that it may not be a very high demand, high paying field. But if you're coming out of school making $45,000 a year, but you have $120,000 worth of student loan debt, just having an education can still set you back. So like the conversation's layered on all of these things that I'm trying to bring to the table for us to think about. So hopefully that makes sense.
It does, and just to echo, unfortunately, I say especially in this day and age, some people need to see a celebrity say it as well. So, but this was echoed by, and like I said, through the magic of movie editing, this will probably be on your screen. Robert Johnson in this video, they had a quote from him: "Home ownership, in his opinion, is as important as voting rights," and we've talked about some of the reasons behind that. Andrew Lee said, "Don't buy the hottest thing, buy the stock of the hottest thing." So once again, echoing your points about getting access to the stock market and, you know, moving beyond just the materialistic ownership. And like I said, I was going to, in addition to those, some solutions and tips that came out. Now, like I said, that was a 2-minute video. So that you're wondering, like, oh, you only quoted 2 people? Well, it was a 2-minute video. So they spoke for 30 seconds, I think 15 seconds each. I'll get that in your show notes, in your description. But for you, as we kind of bound towards the wrap here, what is, or where do we go from here is a simple question. So when we start talking about legacy, you know, this significant gap, personal finance, I think you had a great point about thinking ahead and recognizing, and I want to steal your thunder, that it might not just be about you. So what are we to do?
So the first thing that I would say is you got to deal with the stuff that is within your control. So being able to live within your means, so managing the monies that you have, like you got to take personal responsibility. And that may look like saying, okay, well, if I don't make enough income to do the things that I need to do. So say it's, hey, I'm only making enough to really just get by. I'm barely making a livable wage. Then my encouragement would be find the time, do what you have to do to sharpen and get a commercially viable skill so that you can increase your income. Because you can only manage your budget so much in cutting expenses like that. That is a limited exercise. That's important, but it's limited in what you can do. You need to look to try to grow your income to make room, make space for you to do these things. Now, if your income is already strong, then man, we got to start doing the stuff of saying, okay, let me look to try to automate some of my investing so that I'm automatically paying myself each month or each paycheck. We want to, if I start stepping away from just the money management side, personal finance side, I think it is important to engage civically, to understand what's going on just around us. So most people only think about politics once every 4 years. And they're only thinking about, maybe, the presidential or vice president race, when the reality is the folks that are going to impact you the most are local, and they're actually easier to access. A local judge, a city council person, a mayor, a governor, congressman or woman, um, understanding who's the chief of police. You know what I mean? Like things like that, which these are people that live right there in your community that you can potentially be able to talk to and be informed into what's happening. How is your local city or local town divvying up funds, to just be aware of it. So these are just some quick examples of things that can be done to try to position yourself in a better space. And the final thing I'll say, just from a legacy standpoint, I'm glad you brought this up, man, is to resolve with the fact of it's possible that some of these decisions, some of these moves that you make, that you may not realize them in your lifetime. And now that can be heavy for some people to think of, because they're like, hey man, no, I want to be a millionaire tomorrow. But what if it doesn't happen? What are you just going to give up? And for me, like, so I'll be personal. My grandfather was born in 1897, which, by the way, I'm only 3 generations removed from slavery. His dad, my great grandfather, was born in 1859 on a slave plantation. But my grandfather, born in 1897, there were decisions that he made that he didn't get to see come into fruition in his lifetime, but just as a result of the things that he did, it positioned my parents to be in a little bit of a better spot, which positioned me to be in a better spot to where I was able to become a millionaire in my 30s. And I can say that from a place of, you won't see me beating my chest and saying, man, oh, I'm a self-made millionaire. No, I stand on the shoulders of the people who came before me that made legacy decisions that impacted me and made me proud to have the last name that I have and want to be able to pass something on to those that come after me to build on top of that. So we gotta think more broad, more of a bigger picture in how we approach this stuff.
Yeah, similarly, and we could do a whole nother podcast on this. It's the how, I guess the word I'm going to use is broken. Like I don't even really know as much about the story on my mom's side as far as the history. But similarly, my grandfather was in the military, which provided a more stable and financial lifestyle for my father, and then both of my parents were, I believe, first to go to college, graduate, father master's, mother registered nurse. So to provide a stable home and lifestyle for me and my sister. So similar to you, it is not self-made. It is 3 generations of benefactors, so that I can come here and do this podcast with you here today and be financially successful and independent and have this debt-free book back here. Like, I didn't just wake up in 1982, my born year, and I'm good to go. Now let me just take over this country and put the industry on its ear. Like, nah, it was 3, like you said, planned, and I believe it was planned. It wasn't happenstance, but planned or happenstance, luck or fortune, or when opportunity and preparation and luck collide, an opportunity is provided for me to be successful here today, going into my 10th decade around the sun. Another thing I wanted to talk about, and I don't like to, but I think it's good for people to hear these one-off examples. I'm reminded of my cousin when unfortunately, when his father passed, but he had taken those steps that no one wants to think about. He had clearly been meeting with a financial planner, and he had the insurance, but the insurance he left behind paid off the home, 2 vehicles, all of his college debt, and put him in a position to buy his first home, which he now owns and lives in. And to have that forethought, and people are like, oh, well, that's a one-off, but there's not enough one-off stories for us. There's a lot of people can't tell that example. A lot of people is my father died and he was a Rolling Stone, and that was that. When he left, all we had was the home. Some people will be mad because I butchered song, but but you kind of see what I'm saying. There's like he was gone and that was that. And if anything, there's a lot of circumstance. I saw one recently where it was a tweet, and there's like our father-in-law's passed and has left a financial mess for the family to deal with, that we have to unpack, and there's debts that he had that we didn't know about. So there's different pivots that you can set, and like you said, it can be a different pathway for your life, but it might have to start with you. Something I heard in the nonprofit from a boss I was working for is, we are the people we've been waiting for. In fact, like no one's coming out of that tunnel, and so sometimes unfortunately, Rick, I empathize that it is unfortunate. That's a lot of weight to put on your shoulders, 156 years and 3 generations that you've got to carry around. But like you said, sometimes the shoulders that are going to step on will be yours. Right. We talked a lot about the individualistic responsibility. Is there anything or thoughts that you have on, and you talked about civic engagement, but I'll start local, state, and then going federal, country, to make difference in a change in this racial wealth gap.
Yeah. So what I want people to think on is you can't save the world if you haven't saved the stuff under your own roof. So you want to start there, because a lot of people, they're looking to be a public success while being a private failure. So things start at home, of making sure that your own stuff is solid. Because, and I'll give kind of an illustrative picture of it, of if I see someone who's struggling in quicksand, and I'm like, man, let me pull them out, but I'm in quicksand too, what's going to happen to both of us? Mm-hmm. We're going to sink. And ultimately, unless somebody comes that's on stable ground, we're both going to sink to our demise. So I just want to be really clear in saying the first thing is you want to square up your own situation. Just have some financial stability. But for me, I am very big on being generous, being a giver. That's something that I came up with from a young age, of giving, whether it be to local charities or for people of faith, your places of worship or things like that, where you're regularly making it a point to give, to think beyond just yourself, to those around you, within your community. So that's a great place to start. And then you do have individuals who, for whatever their circumstances may be, they have more influence than just their family, their right around them community. And for those, man, use that platform wisely and effectively to levy that influence, whether it be on the city, or if you've got enough on the state, and so on. But start with real people. I always think there's like this little, and I may mess it up, but where there's a person who's on a beach and there's turtles that they didn't make it to the ocean, and there's a guy, he's walking on the beach and he grabs one turtle, throws it into the ocean, and grabs another one, throws it into the ocean. And somebody's watching him do this for a while, and they're like, hey, well, it's kind of pointless what you're doing. You're not going to be able to save them all. And his response was, but I saved this one. Boom, throw it. Grabbed another one, and I saved this one too. And so it's important to have this mentality that just says, do what's within your capacity of what you can do. Don't feel like you have to save the entire world. Like, Marcus, man, I love what you're doing here with your platform of saying, hey, I got this show. I'm going to interview people and increase awareness of what's going on. And you're building for yourself. You're learning as well. And who knows, maybe you blow up to be, the next Spotify star, or, Apple Podcast star. Joe Rogan, move over. You know what I'm saying? But even if you don't reach all the way that high, man, what you're doing matters. And it does make a difference. And people are hearing what's being said. So let's move within the realm of influence that we have. And if we're, graced to get more, then be solid, be consistent as you get more.
And I do appreciate that. People probably like, man, he just took that compliment. He's gonna, take it on the sleeve. And I try not to talk over people. Say this is a running track. So I let people get their thoughts out. People are like, man, Marcus really just took that. Like, okay, he must think he. So I just want to let people know I do appreciate that. And there might be a gap on Spotify. So Spotify, if you're listening, you holler at your boy. Contact information is also available in the video description below. We're moving to the wrap here. For a shout out on the upcoming show, sound off in the comments. I know this was a deep one, so drop your 5-star review and your favorite quote from today's episode. Your reviews help awesome people just like you find the smooth sounds of the Marcus Garrett Show. And remember, you don't have to wait another week for a podcast. If you're not already there, you can find exclusive content at youtube.com/TheMarcusGarrett, where I answer frequently asked questions. Drop more comments over there. Steven and I can follow up in the comments section. And I'm pretty sure this will not be our first or last conversation. So, Steven, please let them know where they can find you.
So you can find me. I've got a website. It's just Steven with a V, lstack.com. So StevenLstack.com. That's one way you can get in contact with me. Another, I do social media. So on Instagram, you can find me at Stacking with Stack. Same for Facebook. Same for even TikTok. Starting to get rolling with that as well. But I just try to regularly, daily post things to just encourage people in how to think about wealth. Sometimes it's really funny. Sometimes it's really thoughtful. But overall, very encouraging of just letting us know, hey, it is possible to be in the space that we want to be in. So would love to see y'all. Feel free to give me a shout. Be like, hey man, I heard you on the Marcus Garrett Show.
Make sure you tag Spotify and Apple Podcasts when you put that shout out there.
Right. Do that too. Make sure you tag them as well. But would love to hear from you all. And man, bro, this was definitely a pleasure. For real.
Cool, man. I appreciate it. Thanks for coming on the show.
But if we just did a little bit, just a little bit of thinking, not deep, you don't have to think about it all the time, but just directionally of saying, hey, these little micro decisions that I make more often than not can put me in a better space. And for those that come after, for people who have kids or so on, it can put them in a dramatically better space. That joint that you dropped with the life insurance piece, bruh. That was it.
Yeah, that was still crazy. We didn't even know that, so that's still great. I mean, this might have been 7-8 years ago now, but I mean, they're still benefiting from that. The house is paid off and everything like that. Mom lives there now, so yeah, and he just did it,
Right.
He had a military background, so I think he just did it because he knew it needed to be done.
Right, but I mean, like either it was free, or he might have been paying like $15 a month.
Yeah.
For it. You know what I mean? Like it could have been something insanely cheap. He passes away in an untimely manner, right. And boom, generational shift. Just like that. So that was like, I knew you were moving us along, because I would have sat there for a bit and be like, whoa, hold on, wait a minute. You know what I mean? Like, we got to stop right here.
Yeah.
Like, this is incredible.
Yeah.
Like, generational wealth seems, ethereal or way out there, or it's got to be this huge thing. Man, no, that happened.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no, that was great, man. There was a lot of things that you said that were great. There was one quote you said. It was something along the lines, because since we were in the middle, because I'll take notes, I'll write stuff down.
Yeah.
You were like something like, we are the people.
Oh yeah, I stole that from my boss. We are the people we're waiting for.